Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by actual FBI cases. In this episode, I am honored to interview retired Special Agent in Charge, Wayne Davis. Now, today's episode is a little different. Instead of reviewing a case, Wayne Davis provides a fascinating personal and historical account of diversity in the FBI. Wayne talks about the fact that prior to 1962 and under Director J. Edgar Hoover's leadership, the FBI had no fully qualified African American special agents. Hoover was under the pressure of Attorney General Robert Kennedy and the Department of Justice to diversify the special agent ranks. Wayne Davis was the third African American candidate to go through the FBI Academy. This is a fascinating interview. Wayne Davis was actually summoned to meet Director Hoover, and what Director Hoover told him about the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King was unbelievable. And in 1992, when Director Hoover died, and acting director L. Patrick Gray began hiring women as special agents, Wayne Davis was selected to head up efforts to hire more women and to increase minority recruitment. So I hope you listen to the interview. I hope you find it entertaining and informative. One of the things I want you to think about as you listen to this interview, if I were in the FBI still today, I would be one of 134 black female agents, 1% of special agents in the FBI today. Everyone, I am extremely excited to introduce my guest for today, former Special Agent in Charge of the Philadelphia Division, Wayne Davis. Wayne, and it's still hard for me to call you Wayne. I'm so used to calling you boss. But Wayne, welcome to the show.
No, listen, good to be here, Jerry, and feel free to call me whatever. Mr. Davis was my father, so Wayne is what I go by. So
I would just want to give the listeners a little bit of a background. In 2008, the FBI celebrated their 100th anniversary, and in Philadelphia, we had this huge banquet. And for the banquet, I videotaped a number of retired agents so that I could show this video at the banquet, and you were one of them. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do, and it was fun.
Yes, but what was so exciting for me is that I knew that you were one of the early pioneers as far as African American agents in the Bureau, but I didn't know that you were within that first group. And then what was really exciting is that you told me a story about Hoover asking to meet you, and you described that meeting.
Yes, it was interesting. I did get in to meet him, and we had a nice chat, which was more of a monologue from the director. It wasn't much of a dialogue.
Well, just knowing that, this was a man, the director of the FBI, who resisted for so long in hiring African Americans as agents, and now here you are in front of him, talking to him, is just really fascinating. And I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to get into this a little bit deeper, to talk about Hoover's resistance, your acceptance, and, of course, what you found out much later in your career about the exchange between Hoover and Bobby Kennedy.
That's the interesting part. I think at least it was interesting to me when many years later I was able to access the files that showed the correspondence between Hoover's office and the Attorney General's office. That, I think, was the interesting part.
Let's start at the beginning, though, and begin talking about when you first became introduced to the possibility of becoming an agent.
Well, let me back up on that a bit. And Hoover was under a lot of pressure to diversify his special agent force. There were a lot of minorities in clerical, or what we call now, I guess they still call them support positions. Back in those days, we called them clerical positions, but the agent's staff was severely lacking. And Mr. Hoover really wasn't making any efforts to hire in that regard. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General, and he made it very, very difficult for Hoover to not do what he wanted Hoover to do in the area of minority. He was attempting to diversify the ranks of the Department of Justice in general and the FBI in particular.
So are you saying that there were no minority special agents?
Exactly. No minority, fully qualified, school-trained special agents. There were about 5 or 6 or 7 individuals who, through length of service, carried special agent credentials, but they didn't really have the full qualifications that agents are required to have.
So did they have the college education?
No.
Did they go to the FBI Academy?
The answer is no, and I can name them. Jimmy Young worked 42. It's the 42 classification, the deserter cases. But Jimmy, when the director came to New York, Jimmy was his chauffeur. When the heat was on the director, he named Jimmy Young as a special agent, but the work that he did was very, very limited. There was another fellow in New York, Harold Carr, who got special agent credentials, again, because of long and loyal service.
Was it both long and loyal service and so that Hoover could just check that box and say...
Check that box. But Harold Carr stayed down in the basement of the building and kept the director's limousine polished. In Chicago, there was Carl Mason, the same story. Carl Mason did limited investigative work, no college education, and he drove the director should the director have to go to Chicago. Miami, the same story. Leo McLaren did the same job in Chicago. And in Los Angeles, it was the Striders, Jesse Strider and his son Bob. They did investigative work, but they pretty much drove the director when the director came out, maybe to go to the Trek at San Diego. But that was the extent, pretty much, of black special agents. Carried credentials, didn't have the full qualifications, but did what they had to do.
Did you ever have an opportunity to speak with them? How did they feel about the fact that they had these credentials, but really were not allowed to do what all the other special agents were doing every day?
Those who were in the field offices really did do some limited investigative work. I spoke with Jimmy Young on several occasions because I had to go to New York to work on a special assignment. So anyway, we got a chance to talk with Jimmy Young then. And Jimmy felt good. He wore a suit and tie, and he did the job. But it's interesting. They sent me in on special, and I teamed up with another fellow who they sent in from Miami named James Barrow. They didn't send Jimmy Young out to do these things that they were asking Jim Barrow and I to do, because we had the qualifications. We could write the reports. We could contact the informants and everything. And I think the fellows who were not fully qualified but carried the special agent credentials felt good about seeing the new breed, so to speak.
So who was the first fully qualified, went to the FBI Academy special agent?
1962, 2 were hired. One was Aubrey Lewis, and in his class was James Barrow. Jim Barrow had been a clerical employee in the New York office who had the education and had worked for the 3 years that was required, passed the examinations and everything. Aubrey Lewis, I believe, was teaching in Montclair, New Jersey at the time, but Aubrey Lewis was an All-American athlete graduate of Notre Dame University, an all-star football player and track star. So he had that as part of his credentials, so to speak, when the FBI hired him. When they sent him to training school, that was 1962. Ebony magazine had an article on him. Poor Jim Barrow didn't even get his face in the picture, but Aubrey Lewis was the star, so to speak.
Like the poster boy.
The poster boy. He was a nice-looking fellow and the whole 9 yards. So those were the first two. That class went in the summer of 1962. Yours truly and another fellow named John Carey came through the following year. During that whole year, they weren't able to find anyone else, apparently.
That Hoover liked.
That Hoover liked to go through training school. So John Carey and Wayne Davis were the second two to go through the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia.
Well, that's so impressive. And I'm sure people have said this to you so many times, but I mean, you were a pioneer. I mean, you came through the FBI at a time when there was a resistance, at least by the director of the FBI, Hoover at the time, to accept African Americans as special agents, and you were there. I mean, you were there with a huge responsibility, not only to represent minorities, but also to get through the academy and show everyone that you could do the work.
Well, you know, Jerry, you can't control timing. And had it been 3 years earlier, I probably wouldn't have gotten into the FBI. There I was at the right place at the right time. And I think...
Well, don't be too modest. Why don't we talk about your credentials?
Well,
why was it that they thought Wayne Davis would make a good special agent?
Well, I was in the military. I had gone into the military with a commission, ROTC commission, and I had intended to make the military a career. I decided after a couple of years that I didn't want to make it a career, but I had to stay 3 years anyway. So that gave me the 3 years after college graduate, that gave me the 3 years under what they call then the modified program to qualify for the FBI. And I was assigned to a base in Brooklyn, New York. Part of the personnel staff there was an intelligence specialist, civilian. And he kind of took a liking to me, and he wondered what I was going to do when I left the military, because it was clear at that time that I was not going to make it a career. And I told him I didn't know, and he said, well, did you ever think about the FBI? And of course I had not, because, I didn't have any role models there. I didn't, the FBI...
Had you seen the Ebony article?
I don't recall whether I'd seen it or not. I don't think I had seen it. I may have been overseas at the time.
I hope I can find that, because I would love to have a link for it.
I can tell you what the issue is. It's September or October or so of 1962, and it's called The Negro in the FBI or something like that.
Okay, I'll take a look for that and see if I can find it. And if I can, I'll put a link on jerrywilliams.com so others can also read that article. I'm sure it's pretty interesting.
It is interesting, because that's, again, you talk about pioneers. That's the one that essentially, and in that issue, they bring into Quantico Leo McLaren. They bring in the Striders to Quantico just to kind of fluff up the view that the FBI has all these minority agents, when in fact it's kind of part of the propaganda. But anyway, I got through training school. The military background helped. The firearms was not a problem, because I had just come out of the military. And after completion of training school, my first assignment was the Detroit office of the FBI. And I got very, very lucky in Detroit. The first thing that stood me in good stead was I pulled a fugitive, and I'm trying to remember whether he was a 76 was the classification, or an 88. I don't know if you remember what these classifications are. 76 was parole probation violation. 88 was unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. But he was armed and dangerous. That was the lead that we got. And I didn't expect to find them, but I went out to one of the suburbs on a lead and managed to locate the guy there and pulled him out, handcuffed him and everything, and got him into the back of the car. But I didn't want to return to the office with him sitting in the back of the car behind me.
Oh, wait a minute now. So you're saying that you went out on this lead for a dangerous fugitive all by yourself?
Yes. The all by myself thing kind of comes in because when I got to the office, being a little bit different, being unlike everyone else in the office. So when I say unlike everyone else, I think you know what I mean. And what had happened earlier, a few years earlier, there was a new special agent who came to the office who happened to be Jewish, and he ended up resigning and writing a book and kind of naming some of the agents' names and some of the things that they had done and whatever. And a few people got hurt over that. When I say hurt, the Hoover transferred them out of the division and all of this. So they kind of gave me a wide berth. So, yes, I went out by myself. And, again, I didn't expect to find anybody there. I was just going out to cover a lead. It may have been a lead from another office. But I went out, and the guy was there, and I pulled him out and got him handcuffed and into the back of the car. And then I radioed the office. We didn't have cell phones in those days. So I radioed the office and explained the situation and said I'd like some help getting this guy back to the office. And 2 or 3 cars with agents in them responded very, very quickly. And then they kind of looked at me with a bit of wonder and newfound respect. And then by the time I got back to the office to get him processed, I found people looking at me kind of surreptitiously and whispering and
this guy's okay.
Right, right, exactly. And of course, my supervisor called me in and gave me a nice attaboy, saying it was a nice piece of work. And then he said, "Don't you ever do anything stupid like that again. If you think you might be going in to find a fugitive or any other dangerous situation, you put out a call and have other people come and back you up. Don't you do anything like that." And he knew that if I had gotten hurt or if there'd been a misstep or something, he would have been in trouble too. Later on, I managed to assist in a solution of a string of bank robberies, 5 or 6 bank robberies, and I had a good informant and managed to aid in the solution of several bank robberies. They weren't my cases. They weren't going to assign a bank robbery case to a new agent, but I did assist on it and on the solutions and got a incentive award, a cash award from the director saying, very, very nice work. So that, again, stood me in very good stead. And in fact, it was kind of interesting because we worked, the bank robbery squad, which I was assigned to, was a bank robbery fugitive squad and major theft squad, worked very closely with the Detroit holdup squad.
With the Detroit Police Department?
Detroit Police Department worked, when there was a bank robbery, it was also just a robbery for the Detroit Police Department. So we worked very closely with them, and the Detroit Police Department holdup squad had a team of black agents. There were 2 guys who were, I'm not sure they were full detectives. I think they were plainclothes officers. and after doing a good job and helping on this bank robbery solution, my supervisor started calling FBI headquarters asking for another black agent to be assigned because he wanted his own colored team, which is what he...
They want to replicate the good stuff you were bringing.
Right. And he really wasn't comfortable with me working alone, which I did most of the time. And so that the headquarters calls him back, and they say, you've got a very large minority population there in Detroit. You send us a black agent, we'll send you one back. In other words, in other words, you get out there and do some recruiting, and we'll return the favor, so to speak. Anyway, I was there for about 15 or 16 or 17 months, and they never sent another black agent out to work with me.
That time, were your fellow agents in the office a little bit more receptive about working with you?
Extremely so, in fact, because I had very good luck in recruiting a very productive informant. She wasn't much help on the federal cases that I was working, but she was a very good resource on narcotics cases, and we didn't have anything to do with narcotics in those days, but I had a very good friend who was an agent with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, today's Drug Enforcement Administration, and information that she would dig up for me, I would turn over to him. And I could also task her with assignments. She was a street worker, a prostitute. In fact, she was of help in the bank robbery solutions that I mentioned. Other agents would come to me and say, hey, can you check with your informant on this, that, and the other? And so, yeah, the other agents in the office found me a very, very good resource. That worked out very, very well. I got to be a very popular guy.
Well, that's good to know.
I transferred to the Newark division in 1965, and sometime in 1964, Director Hoover had given an interview to a New York newspaper, the New York Journal American, which has been out of business for quite a number of years. But it was a friendly reporter, and he wanted to demonstrate through this news interview that the FBI had a number of black agents who were doing great work. So he mentioned me in that article, helping in solving bank robbery cases in Detroit. And in the article, he also mentioned the Striders, who apparently had some of the same kind of work done in Los Angeles. So I was going to, at this time, I'm assigned to the Newark division, and I'm going down to in-service, and I was told, pack a suit. Well, I'm just going to in-service. Why do I need to pack a suit? Well, it's our word that the director wants to see you. So I packed the suit, and at some point while I was in the service, I got the word to go up and see the director, and I did. I went up, and on the way to his office, you kind of walk down this long hallway, and there are people scurrying around. Everybody's got a piece of paper, and they're running back and forth. And the last desk that you get to is Helen Gandy. That's his longtime secretary, and she kind of gives you this look. You don't know whether it's a grimace or a grin, but she kind of looks you up and down. And I'm speaking in the present tense because I can remember this like it was yesterday.
I can imagine.
The very last door that you get to is his door. And standing outside of his door is Samuel Noisette, Special Agent Samuel Noisette. But Sam, he didn't carry a gun, I don't believe. I'm pretty sure he didn't. But Sam, like many others, through long and loyal service, was given special agent credentials. Sam, by the way, was a great painter, great artist. He worked in oils and did a very, very nice job in selling some of his paintings. At any rate, I'm headed toward the director's door, and I see Sam. He's standing there, and he's looking at me approaching. Sam is just beaming. It's almost like I was his son. Wow. You know, and I approach him, and I say, Mr. Noisette, good to see you, good to see you. And he says, oh, boy, and he looks me up and down, and he's just smiling. And again, almost like I was related to him.
Proud to see an actual qualified, went through the academy, actual... Finally. So then he pulls me over to the side, out of eyeshot and out of earshot of anyone else. The smile leaves his face. He has me by the lapels, and he says, you have anything to write with? And I didn't think I would need anything to write with. And I said, no, I don't. So he reaches in his pocket, he pulls out one of the black government pens,
pulls open my coat and sticks it into my shirt pocket. And he says, "You have anything to write on?" And I didn't have anything to write on. I didn't bring a pad or anything. And he pulls out some 3x5 cards and pulls open my jacket again, sticks them in my pocket, pulls my jacket back close, straightens my tie, pats my lapels down, and he says, "Don't let him catch you short." He motions with his head toward the director's door. And he says it again, "Don't let him catch you short." And at that, he knocks on the door, opens it, and announces me. And in I go. But I think this kind of answers your earlier question about whether the black agents who were agents more in name rather than function, how they felt about the new breed. And I met several more much later when a friend of mine was the first black agent who was killed on duty. I went down to the funeral and was a pallbearer and everything. And I met several more black agents then who were essentially messengers and chauffeurs. But again, they were very happy to see myself and several of the other black agents at that time. So that'll give you an idea of their feeling. There was no jealousy, no animosity. It was just, thank God, finally.
Pride.
The FBI is doing the right thing.
Absolutely. So how'd the meeting with Hoover go?
Well, when you go in to see Hoover, at least at my level, and of course I'm in my second office now, you don't talk, you listen. And he railed on about this, that, and the other, and he was very upset about Martin Luther King. He had a meeting with Martin Luther King, and he wasn't very happy about the way that meeting had gone. And he railed about that. He did to you? He did to me. One of his statements did surprise me just a little bit, but it was fact. He said he was a lot lighter in complexion than I thought he would be, than the pictures that I saw. He must have a lot of white blood in him, clearly. And then he went on, and he was very upset because I guess they talked, and I guess when the meeting was winding down, Martin Luther King said to him, "I have this press release that I'm going to give when I leave your office." And Hoover's position was, how on earth could he give a pre-prepared press release when he had no idea what was going to go on in this office? So he didn't like that at all, and he had characterized King earlier as the greatest liar in some verbiage like that. The most notorious liar in the country, I think, was the way he characterized him. And I think that was probably due to King having said that the agents in some of the southern offices where there was a lot of civil rights activity were born and raised essentially in those areas and kind of sympathized with the local police who weren't really enforcing the law that they should have, the way that they should have enforced the law. So he thought that King, he characterized King as the most notorious liar in the country because, a lot of the agents in those offices had come from the North, and they were down there in their second offices, and their kids were in schools, but their origins were in the North. He was very upset with some of King's remarks.
That must have been uncomfortable. I mean, you're in to see the director of the FBI about your work, and he uses the time not to talk about you and the work that you've done in the Bureau, but to go on and on negatively about Martin Luther King. Well,
Jerry, at the time, I just sat there and listened. I really didn't have any feelings about it. I was still enthralled about being in the presence of the director of the FBI. I hadn't asked to be there or anything, and still wondered what I was doing there. I figured it out later on that the reason was that he had given this interview to the New York newspaper and just wanted to see who this guy was that he had mentioned.
So again, another box check.
Another box checked. And that would have been 1965. I think it was 1965. And not too long thereafter, a couple of years or so, I worked on the hijacking squad in Newark. And 1967, I got transferred to Washington Field office. And the reason was, I found out later on again, was that the FBI headquarters had gotten some information that there were going to be disturbances in Washington, D.C., and they wanted some black agents assigned to the office to hopefully get out in front of this thing, get ahead of the curve, and see if information could be surfaced that would demonstrate who would be responsible, etc. So when I got to the Washington Field office, there was already one black agent assigned, a fellow named Alex Porter, who left the Bureau not too long thereafter. And then several other black agents came in as their second office.
And so this was all during the Civil Rights Movement.
So Civil Rights and New Left movement, Students for a Democratic Society. It was all of that was handled on the squad that I was assigned to. Most of the black agents who came into the office were assigned to that squad, except one, a fellow named Edwin Woodruff, was assigned to another squad, and Woody ended up being the first black agent killed in the line of duty on a bank robbery case. And the funny thing about it, not funny thing, I had just had coffee with him that morning. You know, when Hoover was alive, you couldn't drink coffee in the office. I think that's changed.
Yeah, I think it's changed too.
But you couldn't drink coffee in the office. So what agents would do is they'd come in, they'd sign in, they'd decide what cases they were going to work. And then their first stop after leaving the office would be to stop at a diner or some favorite place and have coffee for a half an hour or 40 minutes or so and kind of discuss the world at large. So I had coffee with Woody, Edwin Woodruff, that morning, and a couple of other guys, Eddie and a fellow named Tony Palmisano. Tony Palmisano had been a clerical employee in the Newark office when I was assigned there, became an agent, and was assigned to Washington Field office. So I knew Tony well, knew him better than Woody. So we'd all had coffee. Then Woody went along his way I think he'd gotten a call about a bank robbery or something. And I went in another direction to cover some leads on my cases. And I went in and conducted an interview. And then when I came back out, there was a lot of traffic on the radio. And the word was for me to get back into the office as soon as possible, which I did. And it wasn't until I got back into the office I found out that Woody had been shot and killed.
By a bank robbery suspect?
Yeah, he was Billy Austin Bryant, had robbed a bank and gone to his ex-wife's apartment, which was in southeast Washington, D.C., not far from where the bank was robbed. And they were no longer married, not together anymore. And Woody and Tony got the word to just go by the wife's house and ex-wife's house and check, just to make sure that he wasn't there. And they did that, and he was standing behind the door when they opened it, when she opened it. And I think they barely got their credentials out when he just pulled the door open and shot both of them, killed them on the spot.
Killed both?
Killed both. Didn't get a chance to draw their weapons or anything. So that was really, really bad news situation.
That had to be very difficult.
It was a very difficult situation. Eddie had two children, a girl and a boy, and just a very, very difficult set of circumstances.
Now, when did you first become a supervisor, and what squad were you supervising?
I became a relief supervisor, and on the squad that I was working on in Washington Field office. So, relief supervisors take over when the supervisor is on vacation or whatever. And so I was a relief supervisor, and it wasn't that long, probably another year and a half. They sent me over to headquarters as a supervisor. When you go to headquarters, then you have the title of supervisor. I would have liked to have stayed in the field office and become a supervisor, but I think they weren't quite ready for that yet. It was a lot easier to kind of let me be a supervisor somewhere else.
So at that point, were you the first African-American supervisor?
No, I was not. Several years earlier, let's see, I went over in December of 1970 with about 7 years of service because I entered on duty in 1963. John Carey, my classmate, who was very skilled and had several degrees. I think he had a master's at that time in computer sciences, and that was ahead of the curve.
Oh, wow, yeah, and in the 60s? I didn't even know they had computers in the 60s.
John was first office Philadelphia, second office Detroit, so he was in the field for probably 3 years before they pulled him back to headquarters. So John was the first black supervisor at FBI headquarters, but his domain was the computer sciences area, and I think he was writing the manual on computer stuff. I don't know exactly what it was or anything. So I was behind him for about, several years.
So as a supervisor at headquarters, you're supervising more so a particular program as opposed to people. A particular program, and the paperwork from the field offices comes into you. You review it, and if you see something that you think needs to be done, then you go back out and you give instructions. But again, as you indicated a minute ago, more program-oriented than direct supervisory authority. And what was that program?
It was the squad that I was assigned to in Washington field office, again, was racial matters and New Left matters. And it was handled by Division 5 at FBI headquarters, which was the Domestic Intelligence Division. That doesn't exist anymore. Principally racial matters.
Okay. And again, this is during the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
I've got to ask you this question. You're working for the FBI. You have the director of the FBI who is making derogatory and negative comments about Martin Luther King. Is there any type of divide or struggle or inner turmoil about what the FBI is doing and asking you to do and what's happening outside with the Civil Rights Movement?
Well, not in so many words. I don't think the job that we had to do in the field office and the job that we had to do at FBI headquarters was essentially to determine if there were elements in the New Left movement or the Civil Rights movement that were problematic, that were sowing seeds of discord. Not so much just investigating civil rights activity as much as looking to see if there was any personnel or people either in the locale who were coming in from outside to stir things up. And doing so, we were very intent on developing sources in the civil rights movement to see if we could, and the New Left movement, to see if we could make that kind of a determination. So that was kind of the way that I looked at things, and I think the way that the other agents who were assigned to those things did as well.
All right, so basically you were looking to see if there were communist elements or communist attempts to infiltrate the civil rights movement.
Yes, and Hoover's big bugaboo was communism. He saw communists and communism everywhere. As far as he was concerned, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was Martin Luther King's baby, was infiltrated by communists. And consequently, he thought King was influenced by communists. So that that really kind of got him against the civil rights movement. But I have to combine that with not just that. I think he was a man of his time. He was born and raised in the District of Columbia, which was essentially a southern city. Hoover also had in mind some people, black people, of good education and accomplishment, whom he thought would make good leaders of the civil rights movement, other than King. One was a judge in New York whose name escapes me now. It may have been Pierce, but I'm not sure, that he thought were moderate, and that, in his view, would have made good leaders for the civil rights movement. I think he thought that Roy Wilkins was another. He didn't think that those people leading marches and giving speeches that got people riled up were the right people to be speaking for the civil rights movement.
Strange that Hoover would think that he had the right to make recommendations or suggestions as to who would be the appropriate civil rights leader.
He believed that, no question. And in fact, I think that probably was one of the things that COINTELPRO. Are you familiar with COINTELPRO?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I worked at Division 5.
Let's break that down for everyone. So COINTEL was counterintelligence.
COINTELPRO was counterintelligence program. And that was a program that was designed in Division 5, the division to which I was assigned. My fingerprints aren't on that, by the way. I worked at another part of Division 5.
Okay.
But that was the baby of William Sullivan, who was the director of the division at the time, and that the intent of that program was to, among other things, kind of embarrass King to the degree that he was no longer effective. The view was that if he could be placed in a negative light, then one of the other more moderate black leaders would be able to ease in and take over the civil rights movement and be more moderate about the aims and the progress and the direction that the civil rights movement was making.
So I'm trying to understand, from what you know, what his problem was with the civil rights movement. Was he afraid that it was going to ignite racial unrest, or did he feel that King and his associates were asking for too much too fast? Was he afraid of the communist infiltration?
The latter thing that you just mentioned was, I think, the principal thing. He believed that the communist infiltration and influence of people like King was causing activities and things that would result in violence.
Even though King had a nonviolence mission throughout his time, he talked about nonviolence.
True, but he did in fact have some close advisors who had associations in the Communist Party USA. Mm-hmm. Not that they were acting for the CP USA in their activity and relationship with the civil rights movement, but historically they had some association with the Communist Party.
The Communist Party or the Socialist Party?
Communist Party USA, CP USA. And with Hoover, once you were involved with something like that, then you were painted with that brush forever. So that's kind of where he was with that these people with this Communist Party background were influencing King and other civil rights leaders to take a more active stance that was not good for the country. And it was, we're talking now about the civil rights movement, but we also have to talk about the New Left movement, Students for a Democratic Society, which ended up kind of being more violent than, they ended up setting bombs and things, resulting in some people getting killed. And I can't say that for the civil rights movement. The people who were killed and injured in the civil rights demonstration were generally those who were set upon by, quote, law enforcement officers, particularly in the South. We're talking late 1960s, early 1970s. And I say early 1970s, very early, because Hoover died in May, I think it was, of 1972. And L. Patrick Gray came in, they put him in as acting director. And that was really when the FBI started making some headway in the recruitment of blacks and other minorities and women.
Definitely women.
Yeah, when Gray came in, he reversed the no women in the special agent position right away. And they must have had some women who had applied, because the first two women entered on duty probably, if not weeks, at least a month or two after Gray was in the chair as acting director. And another thing that Gray did was, I was, again, in Division 5, the Domestic Intelligence Division. He said, we need to put a face on minority recruitment. So, FBI headquarters, you get some minorities over here in the Administrative Division, which was a division which really is responsible for hiring, discipline, budgetary matters, and that's
kind of like the HR of the FBI.
Back then, it was the most powerful division in the FBI. And so they looked around and they found me. so they said, come on over here. So a fellow named Dick Hunzinger was the unit chief in the personnel section. And I had met Dick earlier in another context, and he had me transferred over to the administrative division, and had an agent of Hispanic origin who was also already at FBI headquarters transferred there as well. And we were kind of to put the face on this minority recruitment effort. But that was where I got a chance to look at the files. And that was where I got to see the series of communications between Bobby Kennedy and Hoover, at least Bobby Kennedy's office and Hoover's office, with the AG's office saying, how come you haven't been able to recruit any minorities? And with Hoover's office going back and saying, well, we just haven't been able to find anybody qualified. And this went back and forth. And the reason I was able to get the files is because now being in the administrative division and having this responsibility to put a face on minority recruitment, I said to myself and to my supervisor, if I'm going to see where we need to go, what we need to do, I need to see where we've been, what we have tried to do. So that gave me license to go back and pull the files. And
so basically this is the time period when you were talking about where Bobby Kennedy was saying to Hoover, we need some minority agents, and he was saying, I can't find any.
Well, let me just correct that just a bit. What he was saying was that you will hire minority agents. And finally, this series of communications went back and forth until the AG's office came back and said, okay, you've been telling us you can't find anybody qualified. The next communication you send over here in the next quarter or whenever it was, we want you to identify by name and other information those whom you have surfaced and the reasons that they were not qualified.
Wow, okay.
Hoover.
Accountability.
Hoover may have been a lot of things, but he was not a stupid man. He was not going to get caught lying outright to his boss, the AG, while I mean, the AG's brother was president, or at least, roughly. So he started to gin up the minority recruitment effort. But that's trying to put it in retrospect. That was when things started to.
And that's when your appointment came.
Right. That's when they started to be able to find people that they hadn't been able to find.
So can we say that the reason that you're an FBI agent, you owe it all to Bobby Kennedy?
I think so. I think so. He really put the pressure on and wouldn't take no for an answer. It wasn't just the FBI. It was a number of other agencies, but the FBI really was probably the most resistant and probably the most high profile. His hand was forced. Back in the Hoover days, it was very easy to run afoul of the structure. All you had to do was go out on an investigation, and some little old blue-haired lady who you interviewed didn't like the way that you looked, and she would call FBI headquarters, and that would go up the line, and you'd end up getting transferred to some godforsaken location. So it was very, very easy to get in trouble, so to speak, in Hoover's time.
And I'd hate to say this, but I would think that he would not have been upset if some of the black agents that he was forced to hire got into a little bit of trouble. So it would have been even easier for you to come afoul. All right, so you're at headquarters working in this
the administrative division by now.
Right, trying to do the recruitment of more minorities and women also at that time.
Yes.
And where did you go from there?
I worked there, and I got several promotions in the personnel section while I was there. I got promoted to unit chief of the applicant recruitment unit, and all the while I'm still having responsibility for minority recruitment.
How did you do?
I think we did pretty well as a bureau. One of the responsibilities that I undertook while I was there in the personnel section and kind of responsible for minority recruitment, I would go down to each new special agents class, and I would give a presentation on the need for minority and women as special agents.
And what do you think was the issue? Sounds like there was some problem in recruiting, not necessarily on the Bureau's part of trying to reach out, but maybe on the other side of people being interested.
I think there were several things. I think that one was exposure, and one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to the new agents classes was that the best recruitment tool we had, as far as I was concerned, was other agents. If I could convince the other agents of the need, agents are out there in the street talking with people. And I felt that they would be a great resource if they found somebody or saw somebody in a teaching job or a bank manager or something like that, a lawyer or an accountant. They were our best recruiting tool, I thought.
Well, other than just the numbers, you want more numbers, could you talk about why it's so important to have a diversified workforce in the FBI?
The job of the special agent of the FBI is to conduct the investigations of some probably 200-odd classifications of violations of federal law. When I was in, I think it was 180 different classifications. Now with terrorism, et cetera, we have probably over 200. And the FBI agents are the people who are out there on the street talking to people, developing sources of information, being that first line of people who probably have never met an FBI agent. And with this country being as diverse as it is, my feeling is that that's reason enough for the FBI special agent position to reflect the diversity in this country.
And that's the end of the interview. If you go to my website, jerrywilliams.com, I have photos of Wayne Davis from back in the day when he first joined the FBI in the early 1960s. I also have links to those original Ebony magazine articles. One of the reasons I find this topic of diversity in the FBI so interesting is because I recently did a survey of all of the TV shows that are currently being shown about the FBI. I calculated in my newsletter that went out this week that there are approximately 10 or 11, but I completely forgot about the ones on Amazon, Netflix, and premium cable channels. Anyway, one of the things that's very interesting about all of these TV shows is that they show the FBI as being very diverse. And the reality is that there are currently, these are numbers as of this month, April 2016. There are currently 13,401 special agents in the FBI, and only 2,670, or 19.92%, are women, and only 2,226 special agents, or 16.61%, are minorities. This is about 5% Black African American, 5% Asian, and about 7% Hispanic Latino. I hope FBI Retired Case File Review encourages everyone thinking about joining the FBI to apply. But I especially hope the show encourages more women and more minorities to consider the FBI. That list of current TV shows featuring the FBI is part of the newsletter, the crime fiction newsletter that I sent out this week to people who subscribe to my email list. If you had not subscribed yet and would like to receive it, please just sign up on my website, jerrywilliams.com, and I'll be happy to send out that newsletter to you. This episode was sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back next week for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.